Not everyone is meant to make a difference. But for me, the choice to live an ordinary life is no longer an option.
My life twice, and I've never even seen his face. You are amazing.
What is it?
It's time to go back.
Welcome.
Hey there, welcome back to Generation S. It's a podcast about growing up in the 90s and the early 2000s. I'm Dan Kemp, joined today by a good friend of mine and future world-renowned best-selling author, my good friend, Mr. Odian Levy. Odian, welcome back, man.
It's great to be back. I'm actually happy because you were telling me, I really like you to come back on a certain topic. And I was like, I could talk about this for hours. So I'm just so glad to be able to do that.
Absolutely. No, we're so excited. So we're kicking off kind of a trilogy of episodes here to honor and, just kind of highlight and discuss the original Spider-Man live-action trilogy, the Sam Raimi trilogy, the Tobey Maguire trilogy, whatever you want to call it, trilogy. You know what I'm talking about. When you clicked on this, hopefully it was pretty clear as well, because I haven't come up with the title yet, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be something very obvious. So, and of course, you'll hear the trailer for the movie at the start of this episode already. So, yeah, should be obvious, but I know you're a huge Marvel superhero fan, and we've, that's been like part of our friendship is we'll always just text random things about the Marvel movies as they are now, and quite frankly, wouldn't exist without the likes of the Spider-Man movies from back 20 plus years ago. Same thing with X-Men, I would argue as well. Let me ask you, what do you think was more important in kicking off what we now know as the MCU? Was it X-Men or was it Spider-Man?
I think X-Men just showed that we could go in a different direction, but I think Spider-Man was that solidified it, because the one thing I think X-Men did a misstep on was changing those suits.
Yeah.
The fact that line Cyclops said was like, what would you think? We had yellow and blue suits? And I'm like, yeah, that's what we wanted.
Yeah.
So when you saw Spider-Man look like Spider-Man, I was like, that's what we wanted.
Yeah. And I think the only liberty I think they took, and we'll talk obviously about the suit a little bit more in a minute, but I feel like the big liberty they took with the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies was they made the 3D webbing, you know what I mean? And that really wasn't even that much of an issue or whatever. What were your thoughts on that suit though, that costume they used?
The costume I felt was very true to form to what I grew up seeing. I'm glad they didn't try to revamp it or try to make it look modern. So as you're aware, in the comic books, they tried to just change up everybody's looks and feel or whatever. And so when I saw the trailer, they didn't show you what the suit looked like. And that was my biggest issue is oh, please don't let it be Spider-Man. They got the suit wrong.
Yeah. So, and because I agree, I think it looks very good. The one thing it's funny, I didn't notice back in the day, but now looking back at future Spider-Man suits that have come out for film, but also just comic books, cartoons, whatever, is the eyes. They were triangular, and I never noticed that it was off until all of a sudden now when I look at it, comparing it to some of the other suits in future movies, the eyes just seem, it's weird because they're triangle eyes, but looking back in the comics, they're always kind of more rounded. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think the issue with that Spider-Man suit was a limitation of what we have for CGI, because the eyes in the cartoons and in the movies gave expression.
They moved,
Yeah, you couldn't give expression back that time frame or whatever, right? So I think they did what they could, but I think one of my friends was like, that the position of those eyes is nowhere a human could actually see. And I was like, don't ruin it for me, all right? This is a perfect suit.
Yeah, well, because on the head it looks fine, but yeah, if you think about it, because and it's funny because there's a scene later in the movie where half of his mask is ripped off from damage or whatever, and like you see they tried to position the eye over where it would cover, be over his eye, and it just looks so weird. It looked off. I noticed that at that point. It totally threw me off. But yeah, man. So well, listen, we're going to go through the plot here in a little bit, just kind of a brief summary for those who maybe haven't seen it in a while and want a refresher. I got to assume if you're listening to this, you have seen the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies. But if not, I mean, hey, this is your introduction then. Before we do, though, I want to talk about kind of just, I'd love to hear kind of your memories of Spider-Man as a whole. And then, I'll talk about mine, of course, again. It's been a while. So the last time I talked about Spider-Man on this podcast was, it was over a year ago. It was back when I did with Lou, we did the superhero cartoons episode. And that was, I think, where I first found out from you how much of a Marvel person you were, because you were excited for that episode. But yeah. So tell me about Spider-Man, man. Was it early childhood comics? Was it cartoons? What got you into it?
Oh man, I'm an old chunk of coal here. And what happened is when I was a kid, my parents are very much so adamant to be not watching certain things. Mm-hmm. And so Spider-Man was like this safe, I'm a good guy coming out from, trying to be a writer, reporter thing or whatever. So my parents really did align with his vision. So they really would just let me sit down in front of it and watch it. And so here in Georgia, where I grew up, there was the 60s, 70s version of Spider-Man where it's just really cheesy. You've seen it, the meme where the Spider-Man's pointing at the other Spider-Man.
Oh, yeah, that was from one of the earlier cartoons.
Yeah, and that's the cartoon that I started liking him in because I was just oh, wow, that's very interesting. And then they had Spider-Man and his Amazing Friends where it was him, Iceman, and I can't remember what the female character that he worked with.
Starfire?
I remember it felt like it was Starfire, something like that.
I remember that. Okay, because then I remember like Iceman was voiced by was it Shaggy from Scooby-Doo or was it Fred from Scooby-Doo?
It was Fred.
Okay, I knew it was one of them, like because it was Hanna-Barbera, right, that made this cartoon. Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay,
yep. And I remember seeing that because it was like, oh, there's other heroes, but no matter who they introduced, I always kept going back to this guy is more interesting than everybody else. And so as I got to the reading age, my parents told me I could either read books or comic books. And I was like, I'll read Spider-Man. I read everything. It was Spectacular Spider-Man, Amazing Spider-Man, Web of Spider-Man, and Spider-Man. And the guy at the comic book shop, he would always have a thick stack of comic books. So, yeah, here's all your Spider-Man for the month, kid. And I'm like, oh, I can't get enough of this guy.
Nice. Now, did you follow specific stories or did you just read whatever in any order, or were you trying to commit to because I know they had runs where there was a continuous story and whatnot.
I think I was too young and dumb to understand that there was continuity between them because I was just so happy to see it. Right. I know there was the Clone Saga that happened in the early 90s, and that's kind of when I started petering out. But I was there for Maximum Carnage when the Venom symbiote started becoming a big thing. Yep. So I was on board the NES games that came out. I was like, oh, I feel like everything's coming together. And so as we were talking earlier, the 90s show is when everything really started to show that maybe he can be bigger thing than just from the comic book pages there. And that's what really made me go I picked the right horse to bet on because this is the guy who's making it.
Yeah, well, and for the longest time, even again after the Tobey Maguire movies, he's the most profitable superhero I think of all time at this point, other than maybe Batman, as far as box office success and just outside of just TVs and video games, everything. I feel like it's Spider-Man and Batman are neck and neck at this point.
I do believe that's correct.
Yeah. So, I mean, as far as Marvel goes, man, yeah, you picked the right horse to back there. So for me, yeah, I mean, I was definitely a little later. I'm a little bit younger than you, not much, but a little bit younger than you. And so for me, my introduction to Spider-Man really was that 90s cartoon, right? I loved it. It was the same people that made X-Men. It was, on Fox. And so it was my first introduction to all the Spider-Man villains, Peter Parker's backstory, everything. And so I loved it. I thought it was really cool. And again, it was, as a kid, you always wanted to see live action versions of your favorite superheroes, because at that point, all we really had was Batman. There was a few, made for TV movies for things like Captain America, or I know there was a Fantastic Four movie that never actually technically made it to TVs, but if you go on YouTube, you can find the old 94 Fantastic Four movie, and it's, from what I've heard, terrible. So I haven't watched it, but, so there's all these different, and in fact, I know Spider-Man, I do remember as a kid catching it on TV in the 70s, there was that Spider-Man live action show. Did you ever watch that?
Yeah. So I saw that when I was a kid. There's 3 movies of that.
Yep.
And it was, I want to say the first one was an actual movie. The other 2 were truncations of actual episodes from the short-lived show that they had.
Okay. Yeah.
And, it really surprised me, the lack of Spider-Manning that he did, because obviously there was limitations, so they had to figure out ways to not have him fight any of the villains that was in the movies or in the TV shows. In the comic books at that time.
Right.
So he was like, "Oh, he's fighting a mob boss." I said, "Oh, the Kingpin?" No, not Kingpin.
No.
We don't have the rights to that.
Yeah, because they were weird about the rights. Like now, like you would, everything is just connected. Like they wouldn't dare like throw into some random non-canon villain at this point, because they don't have to. They have the rights to everything. So I'm wondering, what did they have to buy rights to individual characters, like versus like you? Because I was wondering how licensing works for stuff like Spider-Man or Batman. Like if you pay for the character, do you have to pay extra to get his rogues gallery or whatever?
So the answer is yes and no, and it's a big headache. So you can have so let's say you own the rights to Spider-Man and his rogues gallery of like 8. Okay. And you go, who I really like is Cardiac, which is a lesser known villain. And, I want to start street level, so I want to do Cardiac. And I, as Marvel, will go, I have the rights to that, but I lease the rights from another guy who owns Cardiac. And that guy's like, I don't want him to be on your show. And so that's where things get kind of like messed up. That's the kind of issue with the Incredible Hulk and Namor, right? Is that they sold the rights to those individual characters to Universal. And that's why you can't get an individual movie on them, because Universal owns the individual rights, but you can make them as an add-on character. And so that's the headache you had back in the 70s. They sit there and go, hey, Marvel, and you start divvying out the monies. I know you're making the, Muppet Babies cartoon to keep the doors open, but how about you do a Spider-Man live action? Okay, yeah, sure. Well, I want to use some of these villains. Whoa, no, we don't. There's no CGI or trick photography to make these villains look good. So in order to keep it kind of more low key, you make up your own villain, right, and we'll have our character fight it. And that's pretty much how they kept it to that level. But it was, I won't lie, as a child, it was very depressing because you knew villains and you kept feeling like, what comic book did I miss that these guys showed up in?
I'll go out on a limb and say, I think, in my opinion, other than maybe Batman, Spider-Man has the best rogues gallery of all time, best villains ever. In fact, to me, the only superhero other than like Magneto for the X-Men and a few other people, like Spider-Man's the only one where I can name probably pretty quickly like 10 villains that he's fought that are notable, at least. You know what I mean? Like there's that many. And I know a lot of them are crossover Marvel villains that have fought other heroes, but I see them as Spider-Man villains, right? Like I know, like Green Goblin, for example, or Dr. Octopus, like they've fought other people in the Marvel universe, but they got their start with Spider-Man.
I think that you're 100% correct. Is like with the DC universe, right? You can name all the Batman Rogues Gallery because of the fact that those are the people they fight. Same thing with Spider-Man, but you sit there and go, oh yeah, who's Daredevil's villain? I know he fought the Kingpin, who also fights Spider-Man.
Yeah.
And then who else did he fight? Oh, I'm sure there's tons of other people.
Right, yeah, they're out there. Yeah, I know a Bullseye and I know Elektra. I think that's it. That's the only ones I know, and what, Echo? I guess she's a new one now because of the whole show coming out. But
I'm actually didn't even know she existed. I used to read Daredevil to a lesser extent, and I didn't know that she existed. But he has some weird villains as well. But I'm with you though, is that his villains are iconic because it's not that they're overly powerful, they're just really good in one direction,
right?
And that's the issue that he had, is like, especially like when the Sinister Six, is that each one of them had that one singular direction they were good at, and so if they all attacked him at the same time, that's what made it hard. Is that he couldn't just be 6 different things at the same time.
Exactly. And I think that's good because they kind of balanced him out, and I would agree again, this is not a Batman episode, but going back to Batman, every single Batman villain had something that kind of either complemented or mirrored or mirrored Batman in a way, right? And that was kind of where Batman was challenged. Like, you think of like Mr. Freeze is really a tragic villain that, is just doing what he's doing for love. And that certainly hits on Batman's emotional, trauma. Two-Face with the whole idea of having a split personality. So, I mean, there's all these different villains. They complement or they mirror something. And I think those are the best villains out there. You know what I mean? I'll say this, without being a direct copy of whatever. So like, I'm not saying like the Ironmonger or Yellow Jacket, for example, with Ant-Man. I think those are cop-out villains, in my opinion, at least the way they were portrayed in the movies that I've seen.
I will say, if you want to, we can pull this all back to the Spider-Man thing, is like Harvey Dent was Bruce Wayne's best friend and didn't know he was Batman, right? And then he became Two-Face. And so he felt like, I lost my friend. Same thing like Harry Osborn was Peter Parker's best friend. He became the Hobgoblin. And that I think the problem that Sam Raimi had to overcome was Joel Schumacher's version of Batman, because Batman was very dark for the first two movies and became very cartoony.
Yep.
And so, like we were saying before this, you had Blade and X-Men that also came out between that. And it was like, if you were Sam Raimi, you had to try to balance that line. It's like, okay, the two other Batman movies, Forever and Batman and Robin, were, profitable in their own way. But if I'm trying to make a genre really work, how is Sam Raimi going to do that? And he took it the direction he took it into, which I think was fantastic, given the fact that he literally had no guidelines around him, because there wasn't a universe to even work towards.
No. And I don't, they didn't really do anything to set up a universe per se, right? They just kept it as Spider-Man in New York. But, and of course, at this point, I mean, in the comics, the Marvel universe was its thing. Like, they didn't keep them separate. They were all in the same universe together, but they were trying to make a good Spider-Man movie, not a good Marvel movie. You know what I mean? And I think that's what they needed to do, because that's what people wanted. They didn't give a damn about Iron Man or Captain America or Thor. Any of these people now that as like bankable characters, no one cared about them back then. And Marvel, they couldn't do anything with them. That's like, I remember, like, that was the big thing, was like Marvel was trying to avoid bankruptcy. They sold off the rights to their movie rights to characters, and all that was like went with was the Hulk. I think you mentioned Namor, and then you had X-Men and Spider-Man, and then maybe like Daredevil and Fantastic Four. Like, there's a handful, and then everything else, like, Marvel didn't get didn't have until much later, when they essentially booted up the MCU with Iron Man.
And so if you want to add something funny to that, as far as rights is involved, the reason why they started with Iron Man, Thor, and to a lesser extent Hulk, because obviously they had to borrow the rights for Hulk,
right,
is that their rogues gallery didn't really overlap too much with X-Men, Spider-Man, Fantastic Four.
Yeah.
And so the rights, imagine all your villains are tied up in this rights hell kind of thing where you can't use them. And so you're like, well, who can we pick? And you picked some of the lower hanging fruit, like, because these guys aren't people who were popular when I was a kid. Like, you could have a Thor comic book sit there, Thor's fighting, what was it, Hades or whatever. You're like, oh, that's good. Who's Spider-Man fighting this week? You didn't really care.
Yeah, exactly.
And so they tried to turn it around. I think in not having access to that rogues gallery, it made them stronger, because when they finally did get Spider-Man, it was almost like Spider-Man was looking around and there's 50 other villains that showed up before him. Like, wow, you got a lot of road to work there, kid.
Right. Yeah, well, by the time Spider-Man shows up in the MCU in 2015, like, don't get me wrong, everyone was very excited to have Spider-Man finally. That was a huge thing, but like, he would have been if the Avengers had come out even just a couple years after the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies, it would have been Tobey Maguire and Spider-Man carrying the Avengers, whereas this was really almost the opposite, where like at most it was an even footing at that point with some of these lesser known heroes and bringing Spider-Man in.
Exactly, because I think if anything, because we haven't gotten the big heroes in the MCU just yet, outside of Spider-Man, it gave you the ability to fall in love with a whole host of characters that you never. Guardians of the Galaxy would never gotten off the ground if you still had Spider-Man's rights. Absolutely
not. Nope, I 100% agree with that. Guardians, I would even say Ant-Man was another one that, because even when they announced Ant-Man, everyone was like, really? Ant-Man? And then they found out it was going to be Paul Rudd playing Ant-Man, and they were like, really? Paul Rudd? I mean, okay. Yeah. So I agree 100%. I think if they had leaned in too much on Spider-Man, on X-Men, again, Fantastic Four, Daredevil, it wouldn't have made it. They wouldn't have worked. They had to get out there and use what they had and had the rights to, and it worked. They made it work. And now that we're able to kind of fold it all back in, it's been a little messy. I'll be honest. Like, it's this last couple of phases have been a little messy, but we're getting there. So, but I digress. That would not have happened had we not had the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies. Now, I'm sure you know this, but Spider-Man, they had been talking about making a live action Spider-Man movie other than the ones from the 70s, but like a true legitimate, like, big blockbuster film since like 1975, I think. Like, it was being passed around to all these different studios. I remember, actually, do you remember James Cameron was on board at one point to direct Spider-Man?
Yes, I've read the outline to his version of Spider-Man. It was definitely going to kill the character.
Yeah. Well, and then I'm trying to remember, there was a few options to play Spider-Man, but if I'm not mistaken, was Leonardo DiCaprio like the front runner at that point? If
he was the front runner at that point.
Yeah, in the 90s, which, I mean, I don't know. I feel like that could have worked, but
I got a worse one for you. Okay. Canon Films was going to do a Spider-Man movie.
Canon Films is that like the RoboCop and all that?
Yeah.
Or in Total Recall and okay.
I don't think it was Total Recall, but Canon Films was not known for doing some of the best stuff.
Sure.
So imagine if you will, it's the 80s, and here it is. Somebody goes to Marvel and say, "Hey, I want to do a Spider-Man movie. I hear you have a character named Spider-Man." And so Stanley's, "Okay, give me a treatment and let me read over it." And like Stanley like vomited into his own hat because it's Spider-Man literal that he gets bit by a spider and he turns into a man that is a spider, like the Fly. And he's like murdering people and putting them in like these sarcophaguses made out of spider webs. And like Stanley's like, "Did you even read the source material?" It's like, "No, we just thought Spider-Man's like the Fly, right?" No.
Oh my. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, no, I guess bullet dodge there.
And then Michael Jackson tried to buy the rights to Spider-Man, and they almost sold it to him till they found out that he was going to play Peter Parker.
Oh, yeah. No,
and so they canceled that.
That wouldn't have worked. Yeah, no, that would have been weird. Well, what we did finally get was Tobey Maguire. We got James Franco. We got Kirsten Dunst. And we got, what's his face? Shit. Osborn.
Willem
Dafoe. There he is. And I know him from Spider-Man, but then I also know him from Boondock Saints. Those are the two big film series that I know him from. So we started getting kind of wind of a Spider-Man movie coming. I'd say late 90s, early 2000s is when you were like, okay, this is actually happening. And like, we're getting hyped. Because I remember I was in middle school or maybe early high school when I was like, yeah, this is getting made. Get ready. It's coming. Like I was pretty excited. And this is pre-internet. Like, I mean, it wasn't pre-internet, but it was pre-YouTube and all that stuff. So you wouldn't really get a lot of like studio leaks or things like that. But do you remember how you first found out that the movie was coming?
So I'll tell you what really got me excited was the X-Men movie.
Yep.
Is that in the X-Men, if you had the DVD, because that was really sought after back then, right? If you had the DVD in the outtakes roll, there's the scene where they were in New York and Spider-Man shows up in a costume and everybody just goes, "Wait a minute, is it happening?" And nothing after that.
Right.
And so all of us kept sitting there thinking, like, they wouldn't put him in the costume and him not show up. Now, I think the depressing part was that he wasn't a part of the X-Men universe. He was a standalone character. But at that point, we felt like something has to be happening.
Right. If they're going to tease him like that. Yeah. Yeah. Because he's like in the blooper, he's like, "Oh, wrong set," or something like that. Or
exactly. He said wrong set. And that's what made everybody go, "Wrong set." That means there's a right set somewhere.
Right. Exactly. There was hype. So, and then I remember I never saw the trailer, but I know there was a trailer pre 9/11 that I've since seen on YouTube of Spider-Man spinning a web between the two World Trade Center towers. Do you remember seeing that trailer back in the day or no?
Yes, I was in the theater. I can't even tell you what movie it was because it didn't matter anymore.
Of course.
I remember sitting in the theater, and the way the trailer goes is that the villain was supposed to be Shocker before he got his gloves. And he was robbing a bank. They were flying a helicopter to get away. And then all of a sudden, this spider web was between the Trade Center buildings, and there was a helicopter stuck, and it just said Spider-Man. And I remember just going like, what the heck? They did it. They're making this movie happen.
Yep.
And so I don't even remember what movie I saw afterwards, but I remember just telling everybody, it's like, dude, it's happening. And it could have been a really great movie. I don't know what it was, but it was literally the only thing that I was like going on about. Like you said, there's no YouTube, there's no leaked footage. And so you're literally just waiting for somebody to just make a follow-up trailer to that so you can at least geek out again.
Yeah. And I'm trying to remember, did they? I mean, I assume they did. I don't remember seeing any trailers for it, though, but I'm sure there were follow-up trailers that had come out. But I don't remember them. And I didn't see the trailer. And like I said, I hadn't seen this trailer until many years later. But I got to imagine it was like kind of like, Star Wars Episode 1 level of hype, right? As far as going and seeing that in the theater, like, oh, shit, there it is. You know what I mean? Like super pumped.
Yeah. So I have like, just to give you a bit of nostalgia or whatever, I had to look up this title to find out what it is. Trailer Placement Coordinator is the title they gave you for somebody who had to figure out where trailers go for movies. So like, you remember back in the day, you would get a VHS or a DVD and it says coming soon or coming to VHS.
Oh, yeah,
and it's the trailer before your movie, right?
Yep.
That's the title. And so I started thinking about it today. I was like, that person must have had a really bad job back then because there's no superhero movies to lead into. Yeah. And he goes, "Hey, we got a Spider-Man trailer. What movie do you put into?" It's like, Waiting Exhal's out. You think any of those people are going to watch Spider-Man? Like, I don't know, because there wasn't anything he could build off of.
Nowadays, like if you go to a superhero movie in the theaters, you know you're going to see a trailer for another superhero movie. That's just that's because you have that to go off of. But back then, you're right, they didn't unless you had. Well, I'm trying to think like X-Men 2. No, that was 2003, I think, or 2004.
Yeah, that Spider-Man one was out before X-Men 2.
Yeah, actually, now that I think about it, there was a big gap between Spider-Man and or X-Men rather, and X-Men 2. There was like 4 years. Wow. So there was nothing to really lead into it. Now I'm gonna throw this out there now. I did not see Spider-Man in theaters. I wanted to, and I just never got around to it. But you did, right? You saw it in theaters.
I saw it enough for everybody. I saw it 6 times in the theaters.
Jeez.
So don't worry. I saw it enough times.
Okay. There you go.
I saw it twice on opening weekend. I saw it once that Friday, and I remember just waking up Sunday. I went to church. I came home. There was nothing else to do, and I go, I'm going to go see it again. And I did because at the time I was going to school around the corner from AMC College, and my professor was sick one day, and I go, "Oh, Spider-Man's not sick. We'll check it out again." And it's just because you didn't have YouTube inundating you with all the clips from the movie so you can piece it back together later. So I was just like, it's only like maybe $5. I always saw it on a matinee, and it was amazing. And I remember I was dating a girl at the time, and she said, "You cannot take me to this more than once." And I told, "This is your loss."
Yeah,
I'm still going to see it.
Oh my God, yeah. And you had, because the first time I saw it, I remember this vividly. I was at a friend's house. I don't even think anyone was there. I was like watching. I was babysitting or something, and they had a copy of it they had rented, and I was like, "Well, hell yeah!" So I literally put it on the TV on VHS, and I watched it, and it blew my mind. Like there's very few, but there are significant, almost like, I guess if you've seen the movie Inside Out, the whole idea of like core memories. There are things in my life I have done or experienced where you try to chase that feeling you got with that again, and it's never quite the same. You know what I mean? Where like, I'll give you an example. In like the world of video games, I played Counter-Strike for the first time in junior high school, and I was never able to find another video game that could measure up to Counter-Strike as far as the experience I got playing online or whatever. Spider-Man, to this day, has been one of those movies where I have yet to get the same feeling I got watching that. And I'm sure it was just a combination of, I was 15 or 14 years old or whatever it was. And, it was just the right place, right time. But like, I'll say this, because we're going to be talking about all three over the next few weeks. I don't think it's the best in the trilogy. I'm sure nobody thinks it is. But having rewatched it since then, it hasn't held up in a lot of ways, but there's something so special. My experience watching it, because I think it was because at that time I never thought I would see a Spider-Man movie. Nowadays, like, of course you would see a Spider-Man because there's so many other superheroes too. But back then, like, you never thought it was going to happen. And so to be able to watch it, it just felt really special. You know what I mean? And I wish I had seen it in theaters, because I can only imagine just how, was there a lot of, like, you went to matinees, you mentioned, and you saw it 6 times, but was there a decent crowd at least a few of the times you went and saw it?
No, there was a decent crowd, except for on Sunday, but the first 2-3 weekends, it was pretty big. Okay. So, like, as we've done in the past episode that we did, I like to bring up other things that were going on at the same time, is that that same weekend was the Scorpion King. I remember going to the Scorpion King and not really enjoying it, because I thought it was a bit weird that the Scorpion King came out and it was fine as a mummy movie. I thought it did really well as far as trying to tell the story, but I remember like finishing the movie and going, that could have been a Spider-Man movie I went to see.
Yeah,
like
right.
this is part 2. This is, if I don't, because my mind was like, if I don't support this, I'm not going to get another one.
Right.
And so I just kept giving it more of that. Also during that time frame, we had Star Wars 2 and Men in Black 2.
Oh yeah,
come
that's
out
right.
That same summer.
Yep.
And so
big year.
for those big hitters to come out, and it was still the highest grossing movie at that time, because I don't know if you ever watched the show Entourage, but that was like a big deal in the show Entourage, that the movie was supposed to beat Spider-Man. And I'm like, it's such a big deal that even when you have a fake Hollywood TV show, it's still like a thing to get.
Yeah. And because I looked it up before we started recording, like it ended up box office at like 825 million which is, I mean, for 2002, that's pretty big. I think I got to imagine it was the biggest film of 2002 as far as gross.
It was. And I think the funny part to me was that it did something that other movies didn't do. Because when I was growing up, people saw Batman or saw Superman, and some people watched X-Men. But I think I remember going back on campus, and a lot of people started saying, "Oh yeah, I saw the Spider-Man movie." And I think the point of entry of it was so low that you didn't feel like you had to know all the X-Men's backstory to go to it. You didn't need to know, like, why is Batman so brooding? You felt like, I'm learning everything about this character. He's a very low point of entry. And people who I never thought would even watch the movie, I remember being at the library, and this guy is like a jock. And he comes up to me because I'm a nerd. And he goes, "Hey, nerd boy." And I was like, "Yeah, you see the Spider-Man movies? Yeah. Pretty sweet, right?" "Yeah, I didn't know you knew who I was."
It brought everyone together, man. It was just that big. Everyone saw Spider-Man. It was awesome. It was a blockbuster, successful, whatever. So, well, why don't we just I had a little plot summary written up here. Why don't we just go through that real quick, and then we can talk about, some points of the film itself, because I do want to break down some parts of the movie that, I loved and that I didn't love. So here we go. So it's pretty straightforward. High school senior Peter Parker, on a school trip to a genetics lab, is bitten by a genetically engineered spider, gaining superhuman abilities. Ignoring his uncle's advice about responsibility, Peter pursues personal desires, including a pro wrestling match, to get enough money to buy a car to impress a girl who lives next door named Mary Jane. However, his uncle is jumped by an unnamed carjack and is killed. He is shot and killed. And upon witnessing his uncle's death, Peter embraces his powers, adopting the persona of Spider-Man. Meanwhile, Norman Osborn, again portrayed by Willem Dafoe, and also the father of Harry Osborn, Peter's best friend, played by James Franco, transforms into the Green Goblin and wreaks havoc upon Manhattan. As Spider-Man, Peter battles the Green Goblin, who discovers Peter's identity, and the conflict escalates, leading to a hostage situation involving Aunt May. In the final confrontation, Norman dies, and Harry, blaming Spider-Man for his father's death, vows revenge. Peter, realizing the need for sacrifice, rejects a romantic relationship with Mary Jane in order to protect her, and the story concludes with Peter accepting his responsibility as Spider-Man. That about sum it up?
I don't know. So I'll give you one funny piece of trivia there is that Harry Osborn was played by, give me the name again?
James Franco.
James Franco. He actually wanted to be Peter Parker.
Oh, really?
So he read for Peter Parker, and then just like how the actor Tom Hiddleston was trying to do for Thor, and saw Christopher Hemsworth, and like, there's no way. It was the same thing where he saw Tobey Maguire, and he goes, "Pleasantville's going to try to do this movie?" And when he saw him put the glasses on and the shirt, he goes, "I'm not going to get this thing." And so they told us, "Hey, you're too attractive to be Peter Parker, but you're perfect for Harry." And so he was actually saved and was Harry in the movie.
I didn't realize that. That's pretty awesome though. So, all right, let's kind of go through this, because it does start off pretty, I mean, I would say from a comics perspective, because again, I haven't read nearly as many as you have. Do you feel like for the most part, this sticks to the comic lore? I mean, it certainly follows everything I thought about as far as Spider-Man's origin story and all that.
So one thing that all of my comic book friends were mad about was the genetic webbing, right? That he didn't have web shooters. It was part of his body.
And we didn't talk about that. Yeah, he shoots the web out of his wrists in this, like, from his body.
Yeah. And I told a friend of mine, says, but if you really think about it, like, logically, it makes more sense.
Yep.
Because then it's not really a Spider-Man at that point. He just crawls on walls if he doesn't shoot it out of his body
Velcro
naturally.
Man at that point.
Yeah, he's Velcro Man. And so I gave him a massive pass on that. I thought if that was the only thing that was wrong with his origin story, because he did fight. I think when I saw Macho Man being Bonesaw, I can't even tell you how much I geeked out, because at the time he air quote broke his leg in WCW, and he was gone for a little bit. And so I was like, okay, it happens all the time. The kayfabe, break a leg. And then when I saw him in the movie, I'm like, it's Bonesaw, holy crap.
Yep.
But all of that really stuck to it. And I think the thing that gave me the most joy, and the only superhero movie that got close to it, was Man of Steel, was that when he started getting his powers, He didn't know how he was able to shoot the web. He didn't know how he could jump. And so he was slowly like coming onto his own. Same thing like in Man of Steel when he started getting his powers, it was like slowly jumping before he could actually fly.
Yep.
Is that I felt that's realistic. If you or I got superpowers, we wouldn't instantly be like, I could swing through these buildings. No, we're going to crash into a wall.
Yeah.
And that was hilarious. And people were like, oh, why are you trying to make a movie out of comedy? It's not a comedy. You wouldn't be good the first time you started doing it.
Well, and
so
then
I think you did a home run.
The thing is, with those comics, too, there's a lot of humor in those comics. They weren't as serious. You know what I mean? Peter Parker was funny. There were funny moments like that in the comics. Even I know that. So I thought it fit in perfectly. And I feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this was pretty much the first movie to do an origin as part of the main story, right? Like as far as superheroes go, every other super movie up until then that were like mainstream, the superheroes were already established. Even the X-Men, they already existed, other than maybe Rogue, which was kind of like the entry point character for us. But like this was like you got to kind of experience it with Peter, and so those who weren't familiar with Spider-Man got to fully understand, for the most part, what his powers were through him experiencing them for himself for the first time. And I thought that was a great way to shoot that.
I think you're 100% correct. I think it's because they didn't utilize flashbacks, right?
Right.
Because he experienced it. And so I think when Uncle Ben died, it was very visceral that he died because you weren't aware. If you didn't know the mythos, it did catch you off guard that he died. Because I saw when he got shot, the lady next to me like gasped.
Right.
Like she didn't think it was going to happen. And I was like, but that's perfect because I'd rather you experience it with him so you can see him and go through the paces with him than like in Batman where it's a flashback and it's like, yeah, I get it. Bruce walks down the hallways, shot, whatever. It doesn't, you don't feel the same because you're looking at it through a window versus experiencing it with the character.
Exactly. And I think they, again, going back to Batman, I think they corrected that with the Christopher Nolan trilogy. I mean, it was still technically a flashback, but it was a very detailed, like first quarter of the movie flashback where you see him, see his parents killed and whatnot. And so they do kind of correct that because I agree. I think the best way to kind of experience a character's motivations is to see it as they're experiencing it and not, as they're looking back on it, because it's not going to hit the same,
Yeah.
So I think this kind of set that kind of precedent or blueprint for how you're supposed to do a superhero origin story correctly. Now, what got people frustrated was that later on when they rebooted the character with Andrew Garfield and then with, Tom Holland is, with Andrew Garfield in particular, granted it was a reboot. And so it was a slightly different story, but you knew what was going to happen because you meet him again before he gets his powers. And this is the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man we're talking about here. And then you see his origin story again with Uncle Ben and everything like that. But at that point, you already experienced those emotional highs and lows with the Tobey Maguire one, so you didn't want to experience that again. And so when they brought Tom Holland into the MCU, he was already Spider-Man, and it was newly Spider-Man, but you didn't have to go through that whole Uncle Ben story, what have you. You didn't need, because everyone knew, like you knew it's Spider-Man. You didn't need that at that point. But at this point, again, we're talking 20 plus years ago, almost 25 from when they probably filmed it. Honestly, you didn't have that yet, so you really needed this, and they hit it out of the park with it, I thought.
Yeah, if you wanted, if we're going to do comparisons of the Spider-Man, I think when Uncle Ben died in Andrew Garfield's, it was more like a sense of relief because they were flirting with the ideas. Oh, hey, Peter, don't go out late. Hey, Peter, what's going on? I know you guys are really picking up the whole fatherly thing. So when he dies, it makes you feel something. But I was literally like, I can't wait till it happens.
Because it's going to happen. You just like, let's do it and move on.
Yeah. Let's get to the next piece of his growth as a hero.
Yeah.
I think the one thing they did right with the MCU one was that there was never an Uncle Ben.
No.
And so when you did get your air quote Uncle Ben moment, I'm not going to ruin it for anybody, but when you do get your Uncle Ben moment, it caught me off guard.
Mm-hmm.
And that was probably, as you said, catching lightning in a bottle, getting that feeling. That was the first time of that Spider-Man's existence that I actually felt like, this guy's Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Because you finally felt like he went through the paces, and it didn't dawn on me till that movie that I recognized what other Spider-Man were missing, because you didn't feel anything towards the other guys until they had that awakening moment.
Right. And I think that's, again, I think that's what makes Spider-Man so popular in general, is that he's an everyday dude that he gets powers, but that doesn't make his life any better, right? He still has so much emotional baggage from all the terrible things that happens in his life with his family getting killed. He can't afford rent. I mean, so many, like he's exhausted all the time. Like he's literally like, he has all the powers in the world and he's still not happy, which is, I think, is a great allegory to life. Like, you can have everything all the power you want, and you think it's going to work and make you happy, but it won't. And the only thing he wants to make him happy, he can't have, because he's Spider-Man and he has this responsibility because of the values that were instilled in him by Uncle Ben. And so I think you really saw that in these Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies. And I think they did such a good, and we'll talk about next week, we'll talk about Spider-Man 2, but it just kind of, it just snowballs from there, where you really get to see that continuing journey. But again, I think this movie set that up so perfectly. And then at the end, right, where Norman Osborn's dead, you're at his funeral, Mary Jane wants to commit to a relationship with him, and he's like, nah, can't do it. You won't be safe. He can't tell her this, obviously, but in his head, he's like, she's not going to be safe if people know that I'm with her and they find out that I'm Spider-Man. It's just, I can't do it. So he's like, no, I gotta sacrifice, what I want for the greater good of others. And he finally accepts his role as Spider-Man. And I thought that, I don't know. I thought that was the perfect ending to his journey for that first movie. While at the same time, you wanted more, right? It had a perfectly, contained story that left you wanting to see what was going to happen next in his journey. And not every movie, superhero or otherwise, has pulled that off at all, nearly as effectively as this, in my opinion.
So it's a bad turn of phrase, but nail in the coffin to the whole Uncle Ben thing is that before Uncle Ben died, Peter Parker wasn't selfless. He was driven to try to help his mom, his de facto mom and dad,
right?
Pay the rent, but he wasn't selfless because he had the opportunity to stop the guy, and because he didn't get paid, he goes, "How's that my problem?"
Right.
But then after his uncle died, he goes, "Man, and me not caring, that happened to me, and now I have to care so much so that other people don't experience the loss that I feel." Because there was a scene I think a lot of people overlook, was in the movie William Dafoe, Norman Osborn invites Peter Parker to, I think it was like Thanksgiving dinner.
Yeah.
And they were wearing each other's colors.
Yes.
And so William Dafoe was wearing Spider-Man colors and he was wearing Green Goblin colors, but he knew. And I know, I remember watching it and going, Batman never had to have dinner with the Joker.
Nope.
Right. And, Superman never had dinner with Lex Luthor or whatever. There was always this whole thing that there's a separation of church and state between the enemy and the good guy. Right.
That's right.
But in this movie, he was eating with the guy knowing Harry's just dumb, doesn't realize what's going on. My dad's bad. My best friend's a good guy or whatever. And he's like, I got to stop this guy. And even when he jumped out of the way of the glider, he literally said, "Hey, I don't want to kill you. I think I can help you get better." And when the glider came by, his spider sense came on, which is a lot better than the Peter tingle. And he jumped out the way and he ends up killing the guy. Now, I will say at this point too, a lot of people miss this fact, is that not only did Harry experience the loss of his father, but he also found out that he has the worst butler in the history of butlers in movies, because the butler, later on says, "Oh yeah, your father did that to himself, Harry." Are you seriously? You waited 3 movies to tell me
5-10 years, whatever it was, 5 years ago. Are you serious? Yeah.
Yeah, but then the other part of it was that Mary Jane,
we haven't talked about her
Peter,
yet. Really.
Yeah, she liked Peter, and she was like this neighbor.
So in the comics, that's not the case, right? Because she meets her later as an adult in the comics, right? Isn't that the whole thing?
So in the comic books, oh my gosh, I can't even remember her name anymore. It was Gwen Stacy.
Yeah.
Gwen Stacy was his girlfriend, and Hobgoblin killed her. So the same way that Hobgoblin got Mary Jane and took her away, Hobgoblin had her at the top of I think it was the jeez Louise, what is it called? The Statue of Liberty. And I think he threw her off.
Yeah.
And the same way she died in Amazing Spider-Man 2 is how she died in the comic books. That he tried to save her, it snapped her back, and she died. And then from that going forward, he met Mary Jane. But for some reason, the TV shows,
I think that's what it was.
They just never mentioned Gwen Stacy.
Well, it was Mary Jane in the cartoon. I think that's why. And so for me, all I knew was Mary Jane from the cartoon. So again, that's why I really think they were trying to appeal to the cartoon, audience, with this movie more than anything, because that's where they were pulling from a lot. It felt like.
Well, I also feel like that she's a redhead, and so that goes anti like direction of what people expect, because like you have like Lois Lane who was a brunette, and you have people out there who are blonde and all this. So you have a redhead who is actually like the female lead of a movie. You will spot her in a crowd.
Yep.
Right. And so you sit there and who's Spider-Man's girlfriend? He looks over a sea of people. There's this one redhead. It's like, there she is.
Yep.
And so I feel like that made her the easier target for Peter, to be like, I got to stay away from you, because not only, you are this person trying to become famous, but you could be easily picked out of a crowd. And if people knew that you were connected to me, it's like every week I'm just going to be trying to save you kind of situation.
Right.
Which to me, in stepping back, his friend Harry was like, look, I don't know what's wrong with my friend, but you and I can still have something. And that kind of worked out for her as a character development, because I think what you got in Spider-Man 1 was a terminating of storylines. Like you said, you didn't know part 2 was coming out. You just knew it was a really good movie. And so you saw, like, okay, if she's not going to get with Peter, there has to be somebody. So they're trying to find what the next logical steps would be as that movie closed out. But I was like, it did a fantastic job, because in my mind, I thought, okay, there's going to be movement from here. Because, like, what was it when when Aunt May was in the hospital, Norman was Green Goblin and like destroyed the hospital wall or whatever, trying to get to her.
Yep.
And it's like, what the heck, dude? This guy like hates you to a very high level.
Yeah.
And so you're afraid to be around anybody at that point. Like, I'm sure he would try to get away with Aunt May if he could have.
Well, and that's again goes back to the whole isolation of like sacrifice and like doing this for the greater good and not ever being happy, and that's unlike a lot of other superheroes that have a similar kind of motivation. Like, again, I hate that we keep going back to Batman, but I mean, Batman, he was already kind of miserable, right? He had already kind of like refused to be happy for other reasons, whereas Peter Parker always wanted to be happy, and but he knew he couldn't. And so he always you see him put it on the back burner, whereas Bruce Wayne was always brooding, right? You never saw Bruce try to be happy and have it fail. There's one time in Batman lore that I've ever seen where he tried to be happy and then realized that he couldn't because of his responsibility. And that was in the animated film, Batman Mask of the Phantasm.
That's interesting. I think the parallels that you keep drawing between Batman and Spider-Man is stuff that people talk about all the time. One of the things I draw a parallel to is they both lost somebody significant, right?
Yep.
Because technically speaking, Peter already lost his mom and dad. And so
That's
he
right.
lost his de facto dad. But I was like, one person's a billionaire and can't be happy. The other one can't pay the rent and he's making jokes.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. Like, rich and miserable and poor and, yeah, I mean, witty about it, I guess. I don't know, because he's not happy. I mean, not unhappy, but at the same time, yeah, he doesn't need to be. He thinks he does, but he doesn't need to be rich to be happy. What he wants is what he can't have is to be close to people, because if he does, that means that they're in danger and he's going to lose it all over again. So,
well, and that's what blew my mind with to keep with the comparisons. Like Batman in the movies, every movie had like a different girlfriend, like Vicky Vale, Catwoman. I can't remember the other people, but there were other women that he was interested in. And if you tuned into any Spider-Man movie, it was Mary Jane. That was it. Then all of a sudden, Emma shows up or whatever, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But Mary Jane was always like the go-to person. Even in the comic books now, it's like it's Mary Jane. You could turn any year and open up a comic book, and that's the person he wants to go after. And it's like there's something nice knowing that in spite of how bad things are, he just wants a very basic life.
Yeah. And that's the thing is, and it's funny too, because again, another movie that came out not too long ago was the animated Spider-Man movies, the Spider-Verse movies. You see that version of Peter Parker, trying to be happy with Mary Jane and it isn't because he's, whatever. You see him, they get married, they have kids, and you're right. It's always Mary Jane. It's the only time it's ever been Gwen Stacy was in the Amazing Spider-Man. And I think that's just honestly because they wanted to do something different. And what's ironic about all that is that Kirsten Dunst is a natural blonde, and Emma Stone is a natural redhead. So go figure. But
I did not know about Emma Stone's thing, but yeah, I remember when Kirsten Dunst did that and everybody's like, why? She's blonde. I was like, hear me out, buddy. Continuity, okay?
Yeah,
they're trying to match the comic book, right?
And it didn't look bad either. I thought she looked good as a redhead, or I guess in this one she was more of a magenta head. It got kind of redder and orange, like lighter with the later movies, but it was pretty vivid.
Positively loved it because when I looked at it, I'm like, this is what I would imagine Mary Jane Watson would look like.
Yeah.
But I do agree with you, especially the Spider-Man movie is like, he always just wants to make things right. Because I told to a friend of mine, you've never seen a comic book where he's like, I'm tired of chasing MJ. I'm going to find somebody else. Like, he knows this is the person that I need to be with. And it's like that she's rejecting him. She's like, I need you to be a better person for this to work out. And it's like, I can get to this point, and then all of a sudden Doc Ock will show up, and then he can't make it to a dinner or something. And so it's like, it's everything that everybody wants to have is like to be with that person and try to work it out. And like life gets in your way. We all know what it's like. We all have jobs. We all have car trouble, and we're not superheroes. And so because you can identify with somebody trying that hard, that's why I think a lot of people resonated with the movie, because every time we try to show up and do stuff to help Mary Jane, it's like, oh, here comes the Green Goblin again. Great. And I'm like leaving the theater going, like, yeah, there's times you're sitting there, you're like, oh, I'm going to go on a date later tonight. And your boss is like, oh, I need you to work the late shift.
Yep.
Great.
Yeah, and it's not even just romantic relationships. It's people with families, right? You know, you talk about like, you know, you have kids and you promise you're gonna. That's another trope in movies, right? Oh, I swear I'm gonna make it to your next baseball game. I promise. I know I work a lot, but I promise. And then you get called into work or stuck in traffic or whatever, and you don't show up, and the kid's disappointed. Like it's the same idea of like your commitments in your other life, whether it be your job or your job as a superhero. You know, it gets in the way. And so, you know, to be able to balance that, at least, you know, in a real world situation, if your job's that bad, you find a new job. But if you're Spider-Man, like that's it. You're Spider-Man. There's no one else that's going to do it. At least not in this universe, because there's no other superheroes. But
so the one thing we didn't touch on, which I think you're going to be really excited for me to even bring up, forget about Toby and Kirsten and William Dafoe. What about the absolute perfect casting of J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson?
Yes, and thank you, because I would have forgotten about that. And yes, it is a highlight of that film is J. Because I remember, again, J. Jonah Jameson from the cartoon show. I was like, man, this guy's a dick. And then I see him in this movie. I'm like, that's what I envisioned him as. That's perfect. Yeah, no, he was fantastic. And it's funny, too. I didn't realize even back then that was a wig. Like, I didn't realize he was bald back then.
Yeah.
So what were your thoughts on him? I assume you liked him.
I don't know J.K. Simmons as an actor at that point in my life. I saw him in one episode of Spin City, and that was about it. And so when I saw him, it's to me, when Hugh Jackman came on as Wolverine, I had to see the claws to go like, okay, Wolverine, because he kind of looked like him. He didn't look like him all the way, if you understand my meaning.
I do.
Cyclops, you could tell from a mile away because he had the visors on, right? But the second they went to the Daily Bugle and you saw him, I'm like, that's J. Jonah Jameson.
Yeah.
And he had everything, the fast talking, the anger. His wife calls up, says, J. Jonah, your wife's online too. I don't want to talk to her. She said she lost your wallet. Thanks for the good news. And he hung up the phone. It's like, what the heck?
Yeah, he's great, and he just gets, because that's the thing. It's in the comics, and he hates he's not a bad guy. He's an asshole, and he hates Spider-Man, but he also thinks, you know, Spider-Man is like, you know, he's rating, so he wants to get pictures of Spider-Man. But like, yeah, and you kind of see that continue throughout really the first two movies. I know he's in the third movie, but I feel like he kind of takes, and we'll talk about that in a couple of weeks. But you know, in this movie especially, and then the next one, I feel like he's a pretty big part of kind of Peter's journey, and he's hilarious. I love him. He's great. He's a highlight, and there's a reason they brought him back to play J. Jonah Jameson in the new Spider-Man movies too.
Yeah. So to rewind to the 90s TV show, there was one episode they did to explain why he hates Spider-Man so much. And as someone who's read the comic books his entire life, I don't know why. I just figured that he just didn't like Spider-Man. But apparently J. Jonah Jameson had a wife who died. In the movies, she's dead as well. And so, no, sorry, she's alive in the movie. Sorry. Yeah. She dies, and this mobster shoots her, and he wears a mask. And so the mob kept like pressuring him to like not write about them or whatever. And when he did, some masked person like killed her. And so he told Robbie, he says, so because of that, I don't want any more mass vigilantes in my town.
Right.
And so he's like, I'm just after this person. I can't trust him. If you want to save the day, do it without your mask on. And so when we got that version of J. Jonah Jameson where he even said, it's like, if he's going to save the day, why wear the mask? And the fact that they kept and it sounds really weird to say, but they kept Robbie black, which I thought was funny because it was always this thing for me that Robbie was the voice of reason. He was like the good angel on his shoulders, like,
right.
Jonah, you can't not pay Peter. All right, give him a couple bucks then. And like Robbie's like, all right, we'll give you an advance. Just get out of here before he gets mad at you again.
Right.
So it was really good dynamic, but I thought that J.K. Simmons, like, every time he showed up, a big smile on my face. I was like, you're doing it. You're nailing this character with no problems.
Yeah. Honestly, can you think of anyone in this movie that they didn't nail the character that you portrayed in your head before the movie came? Like, I mean, I feel like everyone, even Goblin, the only thing I would take exception to is like, I had a picture of Green Goblin in my head that did not look like the final product. But I wasn't mad at it either. I didn't mind it.
So two things. I would agree with the Green Goblin because the helmet, I felt like was an aesthetic choice that you couldn't get away from because of the CGI back then.
Yeah.
But then as you later learn 20 years later that William Dafoe's face was just good enough.
Yeah, right. They didn't have to put makeup on it. He just had a good face for it. Yeah.
Yeah. But Flash Thompson, it's probably rarely even talked about, but Flash Thompson, I think, should have had he's a bigger bully in the early stories of Peter Parker's life. And so I think that they could have fleshed that out a little bit better.
Yeah.
And I think that not that he was a wasted character, but I think they could have did more with that character.
Yeah, well, and I think it's the fact that they only kept him in high school for the first third of the movie, right? Because after high school, I mean, I know in the comics he's a pretty big character too. He comes back and doesn't he become Venom at one point in the comics even? Yeah,
there's a Venom Flash Thompson as well as Eddie Brock.
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, he's obviously a significant character, and yeah, they never come back to him again. So I agree. That's one that was kind of wasted, but I thought he was fine. You know what I mean? And it's funny, I didn't realize till years later that was Joe Manganiello, who, of course, from like True Blood and all that other stuff. Like this was like one of his earlier movies that he did.
It's always funny how it works out like that you do like a bit part and then one day you watch later on, it's like, oh my gosh, that's somebody famous now.
Oh, I love those moments in movies. You watch old movies, like what do we want? Beth and I watched something recently that was like from it might have been like I can't remember, but it was an early 80s or 90s movie, and we're like, oh shit, that's Ben Stiller, or that's like people you don't realize are like later, like, oh my god, like this was like where they got their start. And so it's always fun to kind of catch those moments in earlier movies that they were in to kind of get their their bit parts in or whatever. But
I got one for you that's like the weirdest one. Matthew McConaughey.
Yeah.
One of his first movies was a movie called My Boyfriend's Back that literally had all of 5 people watch it.
Oh, I remember that. I saw trailers for that where the boyfriend was like a zombie.
Yes.
Yep.
So you've seen it. You're the first person who's seen it.
I haven't seen it. I've seen the trailers. I was too young to see it, but I remember the trailers, and I was one of those where like, did that actually exist? So thank you for validating that for me.
Yes. So what ended up happening is that it's not her boyfriend. It's a guy who's like pining after her and he dies. And the trope was that if he can get her to fall in love with him before like the clock strikes midnight, then he gets to be a human again. If not, he's becomes like a zombie or whatever.
Yeah.
And so what's so funny is that Matthew McConaughey had one line. He was in the back of the movie theater. He threw popcorn at him. Get out the way, nerd. And I go, wait, was that Matthew McConaughey?
Nice.
And because I watched it like 10, 15 years later. So when I watched the credits, rolling, guy with popcorn, Matthew McConaughey.
There it is. Now, was this before or after his Dazed and Confused?
I think it was before.
It was before? Because that would be.
It feels like it's before.
I don't know. I know that like everyone thinks like he got to start in Dazed and Confused. So maybe this was just afterwards, or maybe it was right around the same time. But yeah, certainly before he was Matthew McConaughey as we know him.
Yeah.
So, oh man, good stuff. All right, man. Well, listen, before we wrap this up, any kind of closing thoughts or anything we left out on the table for the OG Spider-Man 2003 or 2000, was it 03 or it was 2002? No,
it was 02.
It was 02. Yeah, so 22 years ago. Anything we left on the table before we kind of wrap up?
I think if anything this movie did was give power to the statement with great power comes great responsibility.
That's right.
I think before that in the 90s and all the other cartoon versions or whatever, it just felt like something you say. And I think that when the movie closed out and he really like embodied it, you felt like he transformed to that person to embody that quote. So I think they did a fantastic job with that.
I agree. And they closed out the film with one of the greatest songs of all time by one of the greatest musicians of all time, Chad Kroeger of Nickelback. Just saying.
I was going to say, was it Nickelback?
I think it was just Chad. Was it the whole band or was it just Chad Kroeger?
No,
I guess
it was the whole thing.
It was Nickelback. It was Hero by Nickelback. That's right. Because it used to come on the radio too. One of the best music videos of all time. Can I just say that is the Hero with the Spider-Man scene spliced in? Oh God, I love those. I don't care.
I wasn't a big fan of Nickelback growing up, but that song was on repeat because it really felt like, this is exactly what a Hero song should be.
Yes, and because that was the end credits song, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Now, fun fact too, before we wrap up, I totally forgot about this, but do you remember who scored this film as far as like the movie score?
No.
Danny Elfman.
Really?
Yeah. So a little bit of Batman there tied in.
I'm sure they sat there and said, you cheated on us. You gave them a rock hard score. Because I thought you were going to say Hans Zimmerman, but Danny Elfman feels like something he would do.
No, it was Danny Elfman. Yep. And that's the thing is it didn't sound like a Danny Elfman, Tim Burton collaboration. It sounded very its own thing.
Yeah.
So there it is. Fun fact. I do have one more little trivia for you here. And you may or may not have known this, but do you know, so Willem Dafoe plays Green Goblin. Do you ever notice he's got a big old gap in between his front teeth?
I have noticed it, but I didn't think there's any significance to it. Is there?
Yes. And I'll say what that is. So in this film, when he's Norman Osborn and he's not going crazy, he does not have that gap in his teeth. He wears veneers. But when he's talking in the mirror and the evil goblin's talking to him, he's got the full on gap.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm. So next time you watch it, be on the lookout for that. I thought that was pretty cool. I didn't realize that until I rewatched like 2 times later. And I had read about it first and then I was like, oh shit, let me go and watch it. And sure enough, he's got like just pretty normal looking teeth when he's just, Norman. And then when the goblin comes out of him, gap teeth.
It's like a Mandela effect because your brain's telling you, no, he always had a gap. It says, no, rewatch it. You'll see.
That's right. Yeah. So, all right, man, good stuff. Well, listen, this is, as I said, part 1 of 3 of the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man trilogy. Now, I will say that this is dual purpose, and this is at your behest and your suggestion. So part of it is because this was a huge part of the early 2000s, right? You have to talk Spider-Man, big part of it. But the other part is there is a movie coming out here in February that, as you mentioned to me, may tie this all together a little bit at least. That new movie, Madam Web. Now, I don't know a lot about it, but what can you tell us about like how this could tie back in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies?
So I don't know how much it's going to tie into what I like to call the Raimi-verse. The original Madam Web was a character that was in the 90s who was voiced by Stan Lee's wife. And so
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, she was the one who was trying to show Spider-Man the way through different pathways. And so the scuttlebutt on the internet is that Madam Web will somehow have something to do, because you know that Sony owns all those rights, has a way of making like Craven and Venom and all these other people be in certain universes, because she pushes and pulls the webs that he's in, as well as the Spider-Man into the multiverse, because technically speaking, before the multiverse comic book series came out and the movie series came out, Madam Web was that multiverse character.
Yep.
In the trailer, there is the person they believe that is her best friend is Uncle Ben. And the belief is that she's trying to protect Uncle Ben from dying, and in protecting him from dying, something else happens that basically makes her into Madam Web. But there's also supposed to be 3 different Spider Women that show up in the movie. Now, one person sadly says, what if it's just like a vision of the future, which is why that she sees them in the 3 different suits, and that's what she's trying to do, is get them in that direction. I'm hoping they are those people
right
in the movie. But if Sony doesn't fumble this, it could really open up how the Sinister Six could happen, because that's what Madam Web was good for. There was a whole, I think it was like 8-part series in the 90s where Spider-Man had to work with other Spider-Men because they couldn't figure out how to beat their villain, but ours did.
I forget, that was near the end of the series, I think, in like season 5, where he had like, there was like the 6-armed Spider-Man, there was Armored Spider-Man, I think was one of them, and there was did they have Spider-Man 2099? No, they had like the Ben Reilly looking one though, I think, right?
Yeah, they had the Scarlet Spider in there as well.
Scarlet Spider. Yeah, so that's right. And so that was the whole multiverse thing. You're right. I totally forgot they did a multiverse thing in the cartoon. You're right. And Madam Web was at the crux of it. So
so that's what the hope is that she'll do.
I mean, I want to say yes because it makes sense, but I also don't have a lot of hope because it's Sony, and I feel like they've fumbled everything that's not directly Spider-Man related. So we'll see. I don't know. Good stuff though. Well, hey, listen, we still have our Tobey Maguire movies, right? So at least there's that. But
there you go.
All right. So all in all, do you recommend this movie? Like, could you recommend this to somebody who had never seen it before? Like, does it hold up for you?
To me, I think it holds up to the test of time. The CGI is still crisp in places. It's far better than a lot of the other stuff that came out during the time frame.
Yep.
And if anything, it did a lot of good acting and a lot of good like spots of high drama where you could actually see the character develop. And it wasn't the paint by numbers that other movies like the Fantastic Four was, which is why there's not, in my opinion, there's not a Fantastic Four movie you can go back to and say, oh, that was a good one.
Right.
But the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies, I think, were a solid set of movies to watch.
I agree 100%. So, well, I am excited because next week, guys, as I mentioned several times on this episode, we are going to Spider-Man 2 territory. We're talking all about 2004's Spider-Man 2, once again, starring Tobey Maguire. It has been rumored to be considered, not rumored, it is widely considered the greatest superhero film of all time. We will see if that still is the case as we discuss it next week. But before we go, Odian, real quick, I mentioned at the start of this episode, you are, in my opinion, a future best-selling author. Listen, man, let's get a little plug in here. What's going on with the book? How's it doing? What's on the horizon?
Yeah, so Hummingbird was a book that I wrote and we talked about last time I was here, which I really appreciated.
Yeah,
and,
of course.
It's been doing pretty well for itself. I have the follow-up novel, Dark Shadows. And so it's basically not in the first person perspective, which is what Hummingbird was. This is in third person God perspective. I think it paces a lot better. Plus it gives you more of what's going on in the storyline. That's been completed right before Christmas, and I'm actually starting the follow-up to that one as well. So the goal is to have the 2 books out plus the audiobook for Hummingbird, which is coming along pretty nicely. I think I'm on chapter 12 on the editing for the audio version of the book. So, maybe in the future, if we can find another topic that I love as much as Spider-Man, we can talk about that on its release. But
Absolutely,
I tell you what, this has been a big thing for me to actually come out here and thankfully have the time to talk about my favorite character of all time and to even have the time to mention a character that I was able to create out there for people to enjoy. So thank you for that time.
Yeah, man, anytime. Absolutely. It's a pleasure getting you on here. And again, anytime we can get something on here where I know you're going to get excited to talk about it, we'll make it happen. So, and we get you 3 weeks in a row this time. So that's exciting. So next week, guys, we will be back with Spider-Man 2 discussions. So be listening for that. In the meantime, if you like what we're doing here, tell a friend, right? If you got friends who like listening to podcasts about nostalgia and growing up in the 90s or the early 2000s, send them our way. Generation S, we're on every major podcasting platform out there. If you want to support the show elsewhere and otherwise, you can check out our merch page. A link is in the description of this episode if you want to pick up a t-shirt or a notebook. We got some pretty cool stuff up there. What else? Check us out on Facebook. Check us out on Instagram at Generation S Podcast. And make sure you're checking us out on YouTube as well. We're doing some pretty cool stuff there. Weekly videos uploaded at least several times a week. And of course, our one and only Hall of Famer Luke Carnivale runs that channel over there. So make sure you show him some love and give us a subscribe over there if you can. And that being said, guys, again, we'll be back next week, part 2 of the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man Sam Raimi series. And until then, we'll talk to you soon.
Goodbye.